If and when the United Nations Security Council and this great assembly decide Indonesia is prepared to deploy 20,000 or even more of our sons and daughters to help secure peace in Gaza or elsewhere.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a really complex question, one that was sparked by a massive geopolitical move in Southeast Asia. It's a move that puts two neighboring countries and their entire philosophies on foreign policy right up against each other.
And it all kicks off with this number, 20,000. You know, it's not often that a single number can shake up diplomatic circles, but this one really sent ripples across the globe, and it completely changed the conversation about who's leading the way in the Muslim world.
So, what's behind that number? Well, it was this pretty stunning offer from Indonesia's new president, Prabowo Subianto. He stood up on the world stage at the Shangri-La Dialogue and pledged to send 20,000 or even more to help secure peace in Gaza. Now, here's the kicker. It was all contingent on a UN mandate.
And you guessed it, an offer that big almost immediately sparked this really provocative question. Suddenly, Indonesia looked like this bold, decisive player on the world stage. And that, of course, made people look at its neighbor, Malaysia, and wonder, is one nation strong and the other maybe not so much? Okay, so let's really dive into this pledge, because this wasn't just some off-the-cuff offer. It was, frankly, a masterstroke of diplomatic performance. By making the whole thing conditional on the UN, Indonesia put the ball right in the court of the world's great powers. It was like saying, hey, we're ready to step up, are you? All while looking like a major military power.
So when you look a little closer, what you see are two completely different playbooks. It's a classic case of boots versus bucks, and man, it reveals everything about how these two nations see themselves and their place in the world.
So on one side, you have Indonesia. Their primary tool is what you'd call military diplomacy. They're talking about peacekeepers, real, tangible, on-the-ground support, using their armed forces as a tool of foreign policy. But then you look over at Malaysia, and it's a totally different approach. They're focused on financial aid, sending humanitarian ships, and fighting legal battles in international courts.
And the scale of what they've committed also tells the story, right? 20,000 troops versus 200 million ringgit in aid. Now, both are really substantial commitments, but they come from totally different mindsets. One is about projecting hard power, and the other, well, it's what some have started to call checkbook diplomacy.
Okay, this table here, this really lays out the fundamental differences. Just look at the very first row, foreign policy driver. For Indonesia, it's this concept called bebas aktif, which means free and active. It's rooted in their anti-colonial history. For Malaysia, it's Islamic solidarity. That one difference right there explains almost everything else you see on this chart.
But here's the thing. Malaysia's strategy, this checkbook diplomacy that outsources a lot of its aid through other organizations, well, it turns out it has a critical vulnerability. And that's the risk that comes with relying on others to do the work.
And that vulnerability turned into a full-blown crisis with this number, 85 million ringgit. That's the amount of donated funds that were allegedly embezzled in the Amman-Palestine scandal. It was a massive controversy that just shattered public trust and really exposed the dangers of a policy that might prioritize performance over strict supervision.
So you have to ask, why? Why do these two neighbors, who are so similar in so many ways, act so differently on the world stage? The answer, it turns out, isn't about their goals, but about their histories, their constitutions, and the political scripts they've been following for decades.
For Indonesia, pretty much everything flows from this one idea, bebas aktif. It literally means free and active. This is a foreign policy doctrine that was born out of their fight for independence. It basically says that Indonesia has to be independent in its own decisions while also actively contributing to world peace. And this is a really crucial point to get. For Jakarta, this is about more than just religious solidarity. It's about post-colonial justice, it's about self-determination, and it's about them stepping into a global leadership role that they feel is their historical destiny.
Malaysia, on the other hand, is operating under a completely different set of pressures. Their foreign policy is deeply tangled up with domestic politics, where championing Islamic solidarity is a huge deal for keeping political support. You combine that with the constant need to balance a very complex, multi-ethnic society, and what you get is a much more cautious, risk-averse approach.
So all of this brings us right back to where we started, with that provocative question about having a backbone. But as we're about to see, the analysis suggests we might have been asking the wrong question this whole time.
Because the sources we looked at really challenge that whole premise. Is being willing to deploy troops the only true measure of strength? Is that the only way a nation can show that it has a backbone? Or are there other ways to show your resolve?
So instead of thinking about this in terms of strong versus weak, it's actually more helpful to see it as two distinct strategies that middle power countries can use. You've got Indonesia, which is playing what you could call an entrepreneurial game. It's high risk for sure, but the potential reward for their global influence is huge. And then you have Malaysia, playing more of a hedged game. They stick to their principles, but they're also very carefully trying to minimize costs and risks.
And this, right here, is the real turning point in this whole discussion. The debate isn't about whether Malaysia has a backbone. It's about recognizing that Indonesia and Malaysia have fundamentally different kinds of backbones, and each one has been forged by their own unique national journey.
And here's a great way to visualize that difference. You could call it a tale of two backbones. Indonesia has a military geopolitical backbone. It's built to project power out onto the world stage. Malaysia, on the other hand, has a moral domestic backbone, one that's designed to reinforce their national identity and maintain stability at home.
So, after all that, what's the final verdict in this tale of two strategies? Which one is right? Well, the answer is they both are.
When you really step back and look at all the evidence, the key takeaway is that both of these approaches are completely rational. They're the logical result of each country's unique history, its political needs at home, its national philosophy, and frankly, its real-world military and economic capabilities.
In the end, a nation's foreign policy is kind of like a mirror. It reflects its internal reality. Indonesia is using the world stage to project its rising power and its identity as an emerging global heavyweight, and Malaysia is using that same stage to manage its complex society and reaffirm its identity as a leading Muslim-majority nation.
And this leaves us with one last thought to chew on. In the complex world of modern diplomacy, what really defines strength? Is it the ability to make one bold military gesture? Or is strength found in the diversity of support, financial, legal, and moral, that can be sustained over the long haul? Perhaps true strength isn't monolithic. Maybe it's all about being adaptable.